Afternoon once again, Prof, and afternoon to everyone who joined the session right now. My name is Kosie Tu from Research Capacity Development under Postgraduate School. We would like to welcome everyone to this afternoon session. We will start the session shortly as some of participants are still joining. I think they will join us along the way. Well, about Prof. Musa, Prof. Musa became a doctor of philosophy in industrial psychology in 2017, breaking an outstanding academic record of being the youngest female PhD graduate in Africa at 23. She previously worked as a postdoctoral research fellow at, at the Northwest University and later as a senior lecturer at the University of the Free State, Bloemfontein. She joined the University of Johannesburg in 2001 and was promoted to associate professor at the University of Johannesburg in 2002. Prof. Musa lecturers courses in human resource management and industrial psychology and supervises postgraduate research. She is also known for the work she does as a civic innovator, particularly concerning women and youth. Colleagues, this is just a paragraph. The list goes on with the awards and so on, like the whole of a page. To mention some few awards, 2018 class of 100 most influential young Africans, SABC top 100 of 2018, 200 young South Africans, 2009. The list goes on, colleagues. Let's welcome Prof. Musa. And Prof. Musa, we thank you so much for honoring this invitation. You may continue with the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nkosi, for that introduction, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us on this platform. I'll just ask for a minute to share my screen because I prepared um, some abstract slides just to help me craft my discourse this afternoon.
Well, colleagues, please kindly mute your mics if your mic is on during the session, and kindly raise a hand if you have a question or type it under comments. Prof will attend to your queries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, please do feel free at any point if you would like to ask a question during my presentation, then please don't hesitate to interject. Also, I'm going to try and make it as interactive as possible because I think it'll just help considering that we're already on an online setting. So just to have that engagement, I believe would be necessary. So please do also engage and participate. Okay, I hope the slides are visible by now.
Yes, Prof, we can see your slides right now.
Okay, wonderful. So we are discussing this afternoon what to look out for as an emerging researcher, which is a little ironic because I also consider myself to be an emerging researcher. So I will be speaking to you more on a peer type of level because I still do consider myself as an emerging researcher. But I guess, known to our profession, we understand and value the importance of, peer review and peer guidance and so forth. So I am honored to be facilitating this discussion this afternoon. So, just as a start, I would like you to look at that image there. And I want to get your perspective regarding what you see. Like what do you see when you look at that image? What are some of the things you notice looking at that image? When I saw the image, there was one thing I immediately picked up, which I found very interesting, and I'm curious to know whether anyone else will pick it up. Dr. Ndakana.
Hi, how are you, Prof?
Well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm all right, thank you very much.
Great.
Looking in that picture, I see people focusing and others taking notes. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that there's something very interesting that they're actually listening to.
Okay, I agree. We had another hand up, I believe. Okay, Dr. Gibson. Apologies if I address you by the wrong title because, I can only use what I see on the screen. We have another hand up. Just make sure you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Prof. From the image, I can see the lady in glasses, the one with blonde hair, looking so worried. I don't know whether the subject they are being taught or lectured about is worrisome or what. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for that contribution. I'm just going to see the chat section says it's like seeing something unbelievable, listening to something unbelievable. Thank you for that contribution. There's someone else.
Oh yes, Dr. Sarumbe, it's Dikeledi here. No, it's like people are okay, they're focusing, but another thing is like they're seeing something unbelievable. It's like wow, they're surprised about
Hmm.
something. Yeah. Mm.
Okay, thank you for that observation. Would someone else like to share their observation? Anyone else?
I see a hand
Thank you, Prof.
from Dr. Makata.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Just in addition to unbelievable, it's like people are relating to what is being delivered or what they're seeing on the screen from the reactions.
Okay.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, so thank you all so much for those contributions. And everything you have mentioned is quite applicable, is quite right. And I especially appreciate, someone mentioned, you see the lady there with with wearing glasses and, her posture. it's, you can't really, tell. Someone could interpret her posture as someone who's listening attentively, someone who's really focusing on the message of the day. And just to give you context, by the way, this photograph was taken at an emerging researchers conference where it was a similar setup to this, but of course you can see there, it seems that they had a much larger audience, and it was obviously in person. So these are supposed emerging researchers who are, being groomed and guided pertaining to their journey that they have decided to embark on as academics, particularly on the research front. And some of you may have noticed or not that there are two other people, two other individuals in that image who have the same posture. So when I saw that, I just, it felt like something relatable to a lot of emerging researchers that, when you get into the space, you wonder and you ask yourself, how am I going to craft my vocation? How am I going to find my place in this space? And sometimes it's an overwhelming feeling that one is consumed by. So I would like to know what can you relate to when you look at this picture, considering all that we have already spoken about, the the feelings of, uncertainty and just not knowing how the journey will pan out, and just the information overload as well is one aspect which often boggles young or emerging researchers' minds. I'm going to avoid using the word young because, it's synonymous with age sometimes. But if I refer to young researchers, I mean starting researchers that are starting out in the field. So not necessarily pertaining to age, because you could come, let's say, from a corporate setting at 50 years old and still be considered an emerging researcher. So just also bear that in mind. So what is relatable to you when you look at this picture and some of the emotions associated with it? What can you relate to in your own journey as an emerging researcher? Whether that is on the front of supervision, whether that is on the front of trying to build your publication profile, or any other aspect of research, undertaking your own research as well, depending on what faculty or level you are in. What is relatable to you? Yes, Tikeledi? Please unmute your microphone if it's
Oh,
in case you
sorry, apologies. For me, it's like being interested, right, in uplifting your my supervision skills. So another thing about this picture, it's like someone is curious, it's like they're curious about this journey to be a researcher. Yes, you're a beginner, so it's like curiosity also. That's what I think. Yeah.
So is that how you feel? Remember, I'm asking you to share how you feel in the context of, let's say, the picture or any emotions associated with the picture that are relatable to yourself. Is that how you would describe how you feel about, let's say, yourself as an emerging researcher? You feel that you're a curious emerging researcher. Is that it?
Not even curious, but it's like looking forward to it, something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Anyone else? Yes, Dr. Kululekani.
Yes. Look, for me, I would say that, you will be curious, of course, about the conversations that have been going on in your field, the research areas. Of course, as an emerging researcher, some of us, you're still not really sure of which direction to take, because it's very important to have your niche, to identify that one particular area that you want to focus on. But at times, you'd find like there's a lot going on in your field. I mean, there are a lot of very interesting research areas that you would want, to find yourself in, so that's one aspect that would make you curious when somebody is doing that presentation about your field, highlighting what are the research areas in your field, what are, the ongoing research that you may want to be part of. And of course, if people would like, talking about the opportunities available in your field in terms of, research funding and the strategies that you may want to adopt in terms of your supervision as well, So it's just that curiosity that you want to grasp everything that you get. But of course, you need to focus on what you are doing and just choose, one struggle for yourself. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Anyone else? I'm going to take one or two more people before we move on. Okay, so I'm assuming no one else has anything to say at this juncture, but I'd just like to appreciate as well some of the themes or sentiments that have come up in this conversation so far already, and how we are actually going to discuss them further in our discourse. So that brings me to my next question. What are the crucial aspects that you consider, as an emerging researcher? What do you believe is important or critical for an emerging researcher to think on when they are obviously at the start or inception of their career or journey as a researcher or an academic? What do you think are very critical aspects to ponder on? One of them has already come up, the niche, right? You need to identify a niche, and we're going to talk a little more about that later on. Anything else that comes to mind? Yes, please go ahead.
Prof, I think it's very important to find a mentor. As an emerging researcher, I think it's very important to have a mentor. An academic mentor and an industry mentor. Those two mentors are very important in terms of the guidance that you will need. When it comes to publications, there's nothing that hurts a lot when you get that email after you have submitted your journal article that it's been rejected. You submit it to another journal and it's rejected, and you submit it also and they reject it again. There's nothing that is so demoralizing as that in an academic career. So if you get a mentor, I think somebody will give you that guidance, that look, don't aim too high, don't submit to a high impact factor journal first. Just submit there, get, little by bit, a little bit until you get to the top, So I think it's very important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you again for that contribution. And, once again, one of the items you have mentioned is something we're going to speak about as well. So that's very good to see. I'll take the other hand. Just before you proceed, I'll read in the comment section. Rufilo says, niche and cutting the umbilical cord. Maybe. I'm assuming by cutting the umbilical cord, you're referring to the cord between yourself and your doctoral supervisor or supervisors typically. That's a very important one as well. All right, awesome. Um, yes, Dr. Gibson.
Thank you, Prof. What comes into my mind is actually to look at how can I collaborate with other researchers in my research area, in my area of interest.
Wonderful. So it seems like, all of you are actually just taking out of what's in my presentation. So I'm really excited to see that, because I believe it will make our conversation more meaningful, as I was somehow able to read your minds, on what you would perceive as important. But like I said, I'm also an emerging researcher. So, I guess we would think alike, in terms of a lot of aspects pertaining to being an emerging researcher. If there's no one else who would like to posit anything, I will continue. I just want to make sure I'm not closing anyone out. Would anyone like to share their perspective as well at this moment? Okay, I'll assume that no one else for now. So let's look at a few of these critical items that we've already started to speak about that are important or critical to the emerging researcher's journey. So one of them, I believe, is settling on a research methodology which you believe you are stronger at. And by this, obviously, we know that there are three main research methods or methodologies that you could use in your studies. That would be the qualitative, the quantitative, and then you could have a mixed method approach. Now, obviously, you would have encountered these from your postgraduate studies, especially at master's and doctoral level. And now, when you are entering the working space where you are now either a supervisor, a novice supervisor, or you are a novice researcher, you're now trying to gain traction and independence within your field of research. It is very important to first master one of the research methods that you are more inclined to, or that you believe you are stronger at, or can make more of a contribution at or in. The reason why I believe that this is important is because, remember, you are going to have to supervise students who are likely to actually be even less than, less novice than you are. So imagine if you have two novices. Of course, typically we would have then a co-supervisor to guide you through this journey, but still you would be very frustrated. And I have seen this in my own experience, that it can be very frustrating, even as a co-supervisor, if you do not have very well-grounded knowledge and skill and ability in a particular methodology. So let's say, for instance, you decide you want to go with a qualitative. You want to cement your knowledge and your acumen when it comes to qualitative research. Try your best to read as much as possible on various types of qualitative research. This will help you to be of better use as well, and better guidance to your research students, your postgraduate research students. And I'm sure you can agree with me, having been a student yourself, that sometimes it's easy to pick up a supervisor who doesn't really know what they're doing, especially when it comes to methodology. Remember that typically, especially at doctoral level, I know some institutions, actually a lot of institutions also, even at master's level, for instance, in the CBE at UJ, we have panel presentations even at master's level, where you come and you present your proposal. And by the time we get to the methodology, you can tell, the level of expertise supervision or guidance that went into a particular proposal. And the cracks start to show from there, because there are some things when it comes to methodologies that a supervisor should easily be able to pick up. So you want to be realistic with yourself. Yes, it's very good to broaden your knowledge and your expertise, but I think it's very important to start from somewhere. If you're going to first focus on quantitative, I know that a lot of institutions and even departments, they have an arrangement to say, okay, which methodology are you more comfortable supervising? And it's very important not to set yourself up for failure, just for the sake of maybe increasing your postgraduate outputs or increasing publications or any other reason. It's important not to throw yourself in the deep end, knowing very well that you may not be able to make a substantive contribution to such a research following such a methodology. So that's very important. It also increases the quality of your publications. Remember, you will want to access or target journals, as has already come up previously in our conversation. And a lot of journals are so critical when it comes to methodology. You will also then realize that other journals have a certain inclination to specific methodologies. So you can then, once you have cemented and honed, let's say, your quantitative ability or a methodology skill, then you can target more the journals which you see are more quantitative inclined. If you, of course, harness your ability in the qualitative research methodology, then you would also at that time target more qualitative inclined journals. So then you also boost your research profile and the quality of your research, because your expertise is sufficient to ensure a high quality research output. So that, I believe, is very important. And moving on to the next one, and remember that feel free to interject, because obviously I'm going to allow, an open discussion once I'm done with the presentation, but sometimes you may have a burning comment, at a particular point, so please feel free to interject. But moving on for now, I believe it's also important to carve a niche research area for yourself as soon as possible. As early as possible in your research career, you need to identify, as has already been indicated also previously in our conversation, that it's important to identify a research area which you believe you can thrive in. How do you do this? Typically, and a lot of novice supervisors or emerging researchers have a tendency to pretty much go the direction of their PhD studies or their master's studies, and that is one of the good approaches to take if it is obviously within acceptable or reasonable parameters, meaning there are other outlier instances where perhaps your PhD studies were more inclined to, let's say, your supervisor's expertise or your supervisor's preference, because that's another thing that unfortunately happens, right? And we sometimes are subjected to this, that your supervisor will push you in a direction that you didn't necessarily want to take, but sometimes because you really just want to get your studies over and done with, you end up caving to the pressure or impositions of your supervisor. In which instance, then that would not necessarily be something that you're passionate about. So it's important to identify an area which you see in the field making a substantive contribution and becoming a master of that particular area. You need to aim to be a go-to person or a go-to scholar in the field. And I'll give you an example. If you think of, well, personally, You know, if I want anything related to qualitative research methods, research design, or anything else, I immediately think Brown and Clark. So that's just for me. Like those are my go-to scholars when it comes to anything qualitative methodology. So you want to aim to be that kind of person, you know, to grow into that kind of scholar, where if people think anything related to, and I'm trying to think of something else outside of my field, let's say microbiology. If there's something on a specific topic within that field, then they immediately think of, let's say, Rifilwe, right? You want to aim to be that person. So it's very important as well to do this, because remember, we have that phenomenon called NRF rating, right? Which supposedly is a gold standard in, you know, in research, in the research fraternity. So if you have ever attended, let's say, an NRF rating workshop, you will appreciate that one of the resounding themes is that it's harder to get a rating when you're an all over the place type of researcher. So that is why it's important to earlier on identify a niche. Yes, there are accommodations even when it comes to NRF rating for multidisciplinary researchers. However, you'll realize that the justification thereof can sometimes be so daunting that, you know, it might even discourage you from pursuing the NRF rating. And yet a lot of institutions in South Africa are now becoming more and more stringent when it comes to acquiring a rating, especially when you reach a certain point in your career. You will find it hard to progress or advance without a rating. You'll see even a lot of applications, they will say must be NRF rating or show the potential to achieve a rating in the near future. You know, sometimes they'll even give you a specific timeline, like a year or two. So it's important that you carve that niche for yourself. And as you can see there from the diagram, you cannot only focus it on, let's say, what you love or what your passion is, right? Because I'm sure you know the saying that passion doesn't pay the bills, right? In another context outside of what we're discussing right now. But that simply goes to show that you cannot only ride on the wave of passion. It needs to be a meaningful research area as well. So how is it going to make a contribution in the field such that people will use your research more and more? Because remember also that at the end of the day, you want to grow your profile, increase your citations, have more people referencing you and using your work, because that is what will signify the impact of your work as well. So you need to craft it in such a way that your niche is a combination of all the critical aspects. It must be something, of course, that is meaningful, that you also enjoy as well, and other aspects which you need to look at as a researcher. Of course, when we look at the aspect about paying well, right? I would equate that to publishing in accredited, let's say, journals, because you know that's also a very emphasized component of, you know, higher education, especially though the higher education institutions that heavily rely on government subsidy, which obviously in another argument is not long-term sustainable, but for now that's what is there, and a lot of institutions are reliant on this. So how do you ensure that you continue to publish sustainably in journals that accrue such subsidy? Because remember, also you accrue in a research account money that will help ensure continuity to your research as well. Again, please feel free to interject at any point. Another thing that came up, and I think my slide just moved there. It moved a bit, cut off my text. But we spoke about earlier on, someone mentioned mentorship and the importance of having a mentor. In fact, I usually say have at least two mentors. And it was mentioned that it's good to have an academic mentor and also a mentor in industry. And it's also very important, speaking to the other point that came up about cutting the umbilical cord, make sure you branch out from your supervisor as a mentor. And I believe it's very important to maintain them as a mentor, especially if you had already forged a good relationship. For instance, personally, I have a very good relationship with my PhD supervisor, who was also my master's supervisor. And we have kept, a good relationship and become long-term collaborators as well. But it's not always the case. So if it is the case, continue to leverage their strengths as a supervisor. But I'm sure by the time you enter the playing field, you will pick up also on some of the shortcomings of your supervisor's approach. Then you start to look for mentors that can patch up and bridge and grow your capacity where perhaps your supervisor may have lacked or may be lacking. So that's also very important. When it comes to choosing mentors as well, I believe it's critical to choose the right mentor, because remember that we live in a community, in a society actually in general, where typically you are judged by your association. I'm sure all of us are familiar with the saying, birds of the feather flock together. And so if at any point your mentor or mentors are involved in any kind of unscrupulous dealings or scandals or anything to do with perhaps, let's say, academic dishonesty, then it reflects somehow on you. And I've experienced firsthand several such cases where, a novice researcher had a mentor who later on was accused of some kind of academic dishonesty. And that affected then, people's trust and perception of the credibility of that person's work, who was a mentee. So also be very careful the type of mentor you take on, the type of mentors that you approach and that you allow to guide you through this journey. Because long term, you want to build rapport and a sustainable reputation as well, so that other people will really view you as a credible scholar in the field. Then, of course, there's the art of networking and collaboration, which is one very critical aspect to to actually take seriously when you are an emerging researcher. The reason why I say this is because you are not an island, right? As a researcher, and you will quickly learn this, that you cannot be an island as a researcher. You need to leverage on the strengths of other researchers. You need to put yourself out there. You need to create meaningful connections and bonds with others within the same area and field as yourself. The best way, of course, to do this would be, let's say, to attend academic conferences. At the same time, it's not always easy, especially depending on the level you are at in your career at present. And I'll speak to, let's say, my own experience. That when I was a postdoctoral research fellow, thankfully, I had so much opportunities created for me to attend conferences, and I was able to build, a good network. However, other postdoctoral research fellows that I knew, let's say in my faculty or in other faculties, did not necessarily get the same support. I would even have my postdoctoral mentor fund, my conferences from their own research entity, but it's not all research mentors will do that for you. Maybe they can send you to one. Sometimes they expect you to do it, let's say, from your own pocket, and other times some won't even send you for any. But if you're let's say a PDRF, a postdoctoral research fellow who has that type of support, make the most of it. When you attend these conferences, showcase yourself, prove to the audience and other experts in the field that you are passionate about what you're doing and that you find this not as, let's say, a pastime or something that is a second option for you or a way of escape from other, let's say, possible careers, but show that you are really finding purpose and meaning in a research vocation. That curiosity that we spoke about earlier on, it's important that it comes out at these conferences. Engage with other people, exchange contacts, because these are people that will help you even in the long term. And you'll realize that once you become a supervisor, you will think that you may underestimate the importance of having a good network until you become a supervisor and you have to appoint external examiners. Then you'll realize that, I think I need a better network. I need to expand my network because it becomes so difficult. And a lot of people, they can go, let's say, online and check for scholars that are in the specific area of expertise that they want, assistance with examination for. However, you ask yourself, even as personally as a scholar, how easy is it for you to just, randomly accept invitations, let's say, to be an external examiner from, people that maybe you're not familiar with? Yes, you may. And I personally have done this on many occasions because at the end of the day, also, it's nice to be approached in some, especially when you're still emerging, you will take almost anything because you want to build that, CV. But to be honest, you'll reach a certain point where it becomes more important to have people who would be in a position to do, let's say, a favor for you. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but it's important to have such people who can do a favor for you. Let's say examining your student's dissertation or thesis, because you will reach a point in your career where you're now too busy to just take on every single invitation. And now the only way you will get someone to review your student's work is if, let's say, they supposedly owe you one because, let's say, last time you also assisted them. Obviously, then matters of integrity when it comes to the assessment will have to be upheld, and we'll speak about integrity a little bit later on. It's also important to look for opportunities to grow your research in terms of your understanding thereof, and also just to grow your capacity. We spoke earlier about choosing a certain methodology, growing in that first. And then when you see that, no, but I think I'm now a qualitative expert, I would like to broaden my capacity so I can start to take on more quantitative supervision as well. Then you would start to venture into that playing field. Then you allow yourself to gain a better understanding with regards to that methodology that you were not so strong at before. So that is also very important. Also learning to put your work out there. We have so many platforms now which allow us to share our research. So there's Google Scholar, there's ResearchGate, there's, you'll have a Scopus profile, which will be automatically created once you start to publish in those Scopus indexed journals. And also we have the ORC ID, right? That as well, it's important to create a profile there because you start to make your research available to other scholars that will use your work and that will disseminate it also to other people. And that's how you also build your citations. And to be honest, I think it's every researcher's goal or every emerging researcher's goal, well, I would like to believe, to one day, have a certain number of respectable citation to show that people are actually using my work. I'm not just publishing for the sake of it, for the sake of ROUs. It's very easy to get stuck in that rut of chasing ROUs, just making ends meet so you have something to show at your performance conversation at the end of the year, or to meet what you contracted in your in your performance contract at the beginning of the year. It's easy to fall into that trap. But when you actually focus on more meaning, delivering meaningful research, then you'll have more people endorsing the work that you're doing. And I'd like to believe that's one of the ways that we derive meaning as academics. When you see that your research is making a difference, it may seem as something small or frivolous, but it's actually nice to see that people are referring to my work, in their studies, and it's something that actually holds weight. Another way that I have personally used to build my research capacity, especially when I was a postdoctoral research fellow and didn't really have that many opportunities. Sometimes actually as a PDRF, you may not even be afforded the opportunity to supervise, for instance. So what I did was I built, some connections, from the conference, and obviously through my research mentor, who connected me with another institution where I started to do some private external supervision. And sometimes it's not even about the money. And you saw on the previous slide, right? Sometimes, yes, we know economic times are hard, and sometimes the only reason you're getting an extra job or gig is so you can make a little extra, right? But also think long term, that at the end of the day, I'm building my profile, I'm building my career towards something more sustainable. So sometimes it's better to forfeit short-term gains, but for the long-term benefit. And I started to, supervise externally for a certain institution. And that inadvertently, and I say inadvertently because it wasn't in my intention in the beginning, it ended up resulting in even an exponential increase in my publications as well, because that I was actually, supervising for a private institution, and they don't, when you publish, let's say work, when you co-publish work with your postgraduate research students, if you do that with a lot of, let's say, private higher education institutions, they don't follow the same claiming research subsidy that public institutions do. So I found that my institution was then able to claim those ROUs, and obviously it becomes now a win also for you on that front. But it wasn't my primary goal. So that is another lesson that I learned, that sometimes don't just do it for, let's say I'm doing it just for the money, or I won't do that because it's beneath me. I mean, I have a PhD. I can't, I need something that's really substantive. Sometimes it's even good to do it as a, community service, if you want to call it that, because you never know what it will lead to. And we have to be honest with each other as emerging researchers. When you're still at the beginning of your research career, you must be very humble and be willing to take on sometimes almost anything. Obviously, you need to weigh and just make sure that it's not anything that compromises your integrity or anything like that. But you must be actually willing to take on any opportunity that presents itself, even if it doesn't have, let's say, financial benefit or gain to you, or anything else, because you never know what it will lead to later on. So continue to build yourself and your research profile in that regard. Also, you will find that as supervisors, when you also take seriously building the capacity of the students that you're supervising, they can ultimately end up being long-term research collaborators. And I personally have 2 students that I've supervised, one at master's level and another at PhD level, that have become, long-term collaborators. If they have, research that they find, exciting, something novel in the field in our specific area, I'm, let's say, one of the first people they will contact to say, are you interested for us to work on this? So it also helps you then not to put your eggs only in one basket, because you have so many people who are willing and ready to collaborate with you. So you build that. And I'm sure most of us here are familiar with the term grow your own timber, right? So even when you're supervising, consider your students as possible future collaborators. And also remember, it's our duty to the academic project as well to build capacity and succession planning for the profession and the vocation itself. So it's also very important to consider this as an emerging researcher or supervisor. And also do what you would have loved to be done to you or to happen to you when you were a master student or when you were a PhD student. There's a certain way that you would have loved your study leaders to treat you. And it's important for you to then, project that onto your own students, even if you didn't have it easy with your own journey or experience. Then, of course, it's important to decide what's important to you. And this touches on what we've already dealt with before. And when we look at, volume versus impact, for instance, are you seeking to be impactful in your work, or are you just chasing ROUs, right? So we spoke about previously that other people, they just want to satisfy the minimum requirement, let's say in the faculty. If it said that I must achieve a minimum of 1 ROU per year, then that's what I'll now be focused on. By hook or crook, I will look for the cheapest journals I can find, as long as they're on that DHET list. And I will publish there just to make sure I get a research output and meet my target. That, of course, has detrimental long-term impact on your reputation and your report as a scholar. Because remember, we've spoken about this earlier, that you need to be futuristic in your thinking. Think long term. What will be the effects or the impact of my decisions that I make now in the future? What will be the impact in the future of those decisions that I make now? So it's very important, and once you start to become more active in the research terrain, you will start to realize that you get so many emails from the predators, right? The sharks and the crocodiles. Now they're sending you emails. Oh, we have read your wonderful research on such, and such. Sometimes your research actually wasn't that awesome if you're honest with yourself. And I've had those moments where I was like, but that research, I didn't really feel confident about it because I was just, starting out. And then they're like, this is an excellent, stellar research. And they tell you, if you send your next paper to us, we'll publish it in 7 days. And you ask yourself, what will be the repercussions at the end of the day of putting, your paper through to such a journal? No matter how high the quality of your paper, but once you have such a reputation for chartering those shark-infested waters, then even when people go, let's say, on your Google Scholar profile and they see, no, this one is always with the crocodiles, always with the predators, then you lose credibility. Even your work will, let's say, be less impactful because people are, while people may appreciate your work itself, but they don't want to be associated with the journal or the publisher. So you need to be very careful of that. And it's very easy to fall into that trap because some of these higher end journals or some of the more credible journals, they can take even up to a year, sometimes more, to get back to you. And obviously, remember, the performance contract cycle is 1 year. So sometimes you want to get your outputs out, within a certain period. On the other end, if you're a postdoc, then you know that your postdoc renewal for another year is riding on your ability to prove a certain amount or volume of output For them to sign that progress report, you need to have something tangible to present or to show for your period of research, typically a year. So it becomes then a matter of what is important to you. Is it quick fixes, or is you long-term thinking? Do you value your reputation more than anything else? So you need to decide what's important and be ready to face the consequences that come with that decision. Then, of course, as we mentioned before, that we would speak about academic integrity. So it's important to always strive to have a good and upstanding reputation and integrity within our profession. Many people will agree that, academia is a respectable profession, and sometimes we're even given more credit than we deserve. People see us as the intellectuals, as these very dignified people. Imagine what it does to our vocation when someone decides to be tenuous in their, research pursuits or whatever you do as an academic. It not only affects you as an individual, but it paints a bad picture and a bad light on the vocation overall. I'm sure in your time you have heard stories of even some serious higher education institution leaders. I know from, like, in the past, I've heard of scandals of people who are now at the top there, and they get toppled by something, let's say, that happened when they did their PhD. This person is already up there in academic management, but something comes up that their PhD was actually substantially plagiarized, and then this person, comes tumbling from high up there. And that goes back to what we've been emphasizing, that it's important to think of long term. Some of the shortcuts we think we need to take to just stay afloat as emerging researchers or academics, they come to bite us later on. So it's always important to uphold a high standard of academic integrity and to avoid dishonesty as an academic. Also, it's important to practice this even with your publications. There are some instances where, and this is something that's argued a lot actually, where even institutions, they do encourage this, that if you want to go on a conference, we'll fund the conference on the condition that you must later produce a journal article. But there's some journals, let's say, that will say this should not have been, let's say, published 50% or more of it should not have been published elsewhere, even or presented at a conference or published as a conference proceeding. Then others will say not even 50% at all. So you need to know the publisher you're dealing with. What is their policy? Do they allow at least 50%? Meaning, you had a conceptual concept and then you worked it into something more empirical, and then you obviously presented something conceptual at the conference, and then you published the empirical aspect for the journal. Other journals, yes, do accept that, but not all. So the onus is on you as a researcher and as an emerging researcher, because you need to be careful of the blanket approach to say, no, you can, have a conference paper and then work it into a journal article. Yes, it's true, but not in all cases. It depends on which journal you're going to target. So you need to be aware of that, because sometimes you will end up falling into the trap of academic dishonesty when it was unintentional. So it's our responsibility as emerging researchers to be aware of this. What is acceptable where? And you need to uphold and adhere to the expectations of that particular publisher and remain within the parameters of those policies. It's very important. Another common one is authorship gifting, and I'm sure some of you maybe have encountered this. Some of us also as emerging researchers or academics, we might get tempted to do this, where if you can just get someone on your paper, if you can just get that senior academic on your paper, it will reflect better on your work, right? So it's very important to always shy away from that, because you can actually approach this person, a senior academic, and say, I just need you to be on my paper, for instance. You don't need to do anything, you don't need to contribute anything towards this paper, but if you can just let me use your name as an author, because you believe that this will put you out there, because this person has already established credibility and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's unfortunate, it's academic dishonesty, and you never know how some of these things may get out. At least let the person have editorial input. That's even better, because a lot of journals will ask, what was the contribution of the authors? And you can say, no, this person provided substantial editorial inputs as the expert in the field. But avoid authorship gifting. Another thing that happens sometimes with us emerging researchers is that because you want to increase the volume of your publications, then you will start to gift each other authorship with, let's say, your colleagues. You'll say, if you put me on your paper, I'll put you on mine, and so forth. But sometimes, that hook or crook, at the end of the day, it could lead to dangerous repercussions. So it's important that even if the contribution is small, at least make that contribution to that paper. Don't be in the habit of just being comfortable with having your name on something you never actually contributed to. Even if it's the minutest contribution, but have something that you actually worked on that paper. And also vice versa. If someone wants to be on your paper, you tell them, no, you have to do something at least to earn this authorship, even if you're the 10th author, but you must make a contribution there. I see there's a hand up.
Yes, Prof. I have two things. Number one, I still remember when I was a PhD candidate. I need you to tell me between these two things. You see, there's a narrative that if you are a PhD candidate and you publish a paper, you are then enforced to have all your supervisors in that paper. But I have a question there. You see, something that doesn't sit well with me. Number one, there's a difference between writing a thesis or a PhD dissertation and writing a paper publication. My supervisors work with me on my thesis. When I publish a paper, I put that paper together alone, and I need my supervisor's contribution on that paper. And if they do not contribute on that paper, I don't think it's ethical to have their names on that paper, even though the paper is an extract of the PhD. Correct? I think that's how it should be. But of course, as per your experience, you will correct me there. But I've had an incident in one of my publications when I was still a PhD student. I published a paper and I excluded one of my supervisors. I only put the one who contributed to the paper. And that was an issue with my supervisor. But I said, well, you didn't contribute on this paper. Yes, you're my supervisor. You didn't contribute on this paper. Therefore, I didn't include your name here. I only put my one supervisor who gave me some contribution on that paper. That is number one. But of course, you will correct me there. But number two, in terms of citations as well, I've seen supervisors, making it a requirement for their students to cite them on publications, because of course they want citations. So then they would ask their students, look, if you are writing a paper, you need to cite one of my publications. I think also that is academic dishonesty as well. So these two things are very disturbing with me, as I'm starting my academic career. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll quickly address your comments, your inputs, and then I'll also go to the chat section quickly. So I agree with you, the first instant. I definitely agree with that. And I've done that before as well, but it was with a co-supervisor for a PhD I supervised before. Actually, this co-supervisor was very slippery and didn't even contribute to the thesis itself. But because I had left that institution, there's a rule with higher degrees that there must be at least an internal supervisor. So that's how he got away with remaining even as a supervisor, even after not really contributing. But when it came to publication, again, was dragging their feet. They were dragging their feet, that co-supervisor. So the student actually approached me and said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable that this person hasn't contributed to even the thesis itself. They haven't contributed much at all, only minutely to the proposal, but not even enough to even have their name as a co-supervisor. So is it okay if I exclude them from publication? And I said, and usually I often refer my students to policy. I've realized, sometimes I've actually myself been on the wrong side of the policy without knowing, right? And I'll give you just a quick example that I completed my PhD in 18 months, actually 16 months, but a year and a half basically. And I wasn't aware of the policy that you must be registered for at least 2 years for you to be conferred with a doctoral qualification. So I tried obviously to fight it and all of that, but it came back to me and they said the onus was on you to know the policy and all of that. And obviously, sometimes also as supervisors, you take for granted or you assume that your students must read the policy or they must know the policy. So my supervisors didn't really tell me about this and they allowed me to finish, in such a short space of time because they thought that I knew, and I had to sit for a whole semester, but I couldn't then say, no, it's the institution's fault or whatever, because I was on the wrong side of the policy. So that's a very important thing. I told the student to go look at the policy, and indeed, it did permit that institution's policy permitted that any supervisor, whether main or co, can be excluded from publication if they didn't actually contribute. On the other hand, I noticed with UJ policy, right? Even in your supervisor student agreement, there's a clause there which says you cannot publish any work without either the supervisors or the student, meaning it forces everyone to be a contributor even to the publication. Meaning, even as a student, if you then go ahead and publish and exclude someone who didn't contribute, you'll be on the wrong side of the policy because it states that everyone must contribute and no one must be excluded from the publication. So even if the person wasn't coming to the party, they would say you as a student should have gone with the agreement to them and said, listen, I want to publish my work and this is what the policy is saying. So you need to come on board. Otherwise, I'm taking this up with higher authorities. So then you start to see even the significance of policy when it comes to upholding academic integrity. And also, policies are different at various institutions. And I see Dr. Kelemu, who had asked a question about the criteria for renewal for postdoctoral research fellows at UJ has left. But that's something else I wanted to actually speak about. That personally, I actually haven't had a look at, the postdoctoral fellowship criteria at UJ because I haven't yet had the opportunity to mentor a PDRF. But as a PDRF from another institution myself, having gone through like postdoctoral fellowship, I know what the requirements were at that institution. But I can tell you that even at the previous institution I worked at, it was different from where I was a postdoc. Their policies were different. So it's also important then to know what is applicable at which institution, and never ever make the mistake of thinking because something was acceptable at a previous institution you were enrolled at or working at, then it would automatically be acceptable at another institution. There are some intricacies when it comes to policies and administrative, procedures that actually differ from institution to institution. Obviously, overarching the general higher degrees policy to which all institutions must adhere. So that's one. And then the second one, actually remind me, what was the second comment? Oh yeah, the citations. I remember now. The citations. Personally, I I don't believe it should be like holding a knife to someone's throat as a supervisor to say you must cite me. And I've seen actually a lot of supervisors that do that. But I think it's okay to suggest, let's say, your work which you believe is absolutely applicable to a student's study, but don't make it almost compulsory to say if you don't cite me, then one, two, and three. Or even if you don't threaten the student, but you start to act up when you feel that you have not been cited. So now you start to act up towards this student. That I believe is very wrong. But if you see that indeed one of your works is perfectly applicable here, and I've personally done this before where a student included, let's say, information from 2003 and 2006 and 2008. And I was like, I recommended actually other more recent, because remember, research is about timeliness and currency as well. So I recommended other recent publications, but not only my own. I only recommended one of my own, which was applicable, and several others from other scholars, because obviously, I'm also trying to be well versed in the field. So I know other scholars' information, other scholars' publications on certain areas or topics. So I won't then say you must use only mine, And if my publication wasn't applicable, I wouldn't even recommend it in the first place. I would have only recommended those other ones. But to then, hold guns to your student's head and say you must cite me or else, then it also questions the actual impact of your work. Because personally, I'd rather be cited by people I don't know, because then I'm like curious, how do they find my work? So people actually, are seeing my work, and it personally makes me feel better as a researcher. I hope I've addressed your comments satisfactorily. Okay, I hope so. So we'll quickly move on. So holding academic integrity. Pardon?
I was saying, yes, you have answered me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc. So academic integrity is very important because in the end, remember, we were groomed, or we're being groomed into, aspiring seasoned academics. There are also those coming after us who are being groomed as well. And how we behave and the practices that we espouse will eventually start to show up even in their academic practices. So it's very important for us to be as honest and upright as possible. Then, of course, consistency is key. That is very important. Always be consistent. Avoid, those gaps in your research, when you and there obviously needs to be a good reason, but personally, and I've actually had one gap in my research output, which was during the pandemic, which happened to be also the time when we started our family as well. So it was a tough year, being, I don't know, like maybe it was just me, but I feel like it was a bit challenging to be pregnant during the height of the pandemic, and you had to even get a letter to go see the gynae and all of that. So it was quite challenging, and research was the last thing on my mind. But I know that in a lot of instances, whether you're applying for research funding or NRF rating or other research related applications, they will ask you to actually explain any gaps in your research output. And I had to explain now that it was the pandemic and then pregnancy challenges, complications, all of that. It's not a nice thing to have to explain. If you can avoid it, by all means do, you know. So always try to be consistent with your research output. Create a pipeline in advance. Know what you're gonna, how am I gonna push my research outputs for the following year. Already plan it for this year. I can tell you I've learned now ever since my lapse during the pandemic, I plan my outputs, my pipelines maybe 2 years in advance in a lot of cases. So you find a lot of my publications, even let's say for this year, it's stuff that I already put through the end of last year. And that will help you even to alleviate pressure as an emerging researcher. Again, obviously, try not to bite off more than you can chew, whether it's as a supervisor or even when you don't get too excited with the collaboration, right? Don't say, no, I'll accept every single invitation to collaboration that I get, because you may end up drowning. Don't say, I'll take on as many students for postgraduate supervision as I can, because you'll end up drowning. At the end of the day, your pipelines, you need to clear out your pipelines, remember. So if you have people blocking your pipeline all the time, students blocking your pipeline, it will be, negative. It'll have a negative impact on you in the long term. I saw there's a hand up. Dr. Is it let me just check. Habib? Dr. Habib, you had your hand up. I hope you're not muted and speaking. Okay. Someone else asked, I'm looking for opportunities for external private supervision. In the event that I do not get such support from my mentor, how do I approach institutions for such an opportunity? So you actually just look at the internet is so helpful these days. So you look at various institutions, let's say, and check relevant contacts at those institutions and just read out, find out, do you have any opportunities or capacity? Sometimes actually they have more opportunities than people they're getting. And you find that they're actually eager and they wish people could actually come forth and volunteer themselves to assist with such opportunities for supervision, private supervision. I can tell you a lot of emerging researchers I have advised to do this. They actually are now overwhelmed with opportunities that they have to even refer others. So just know first of all what your field, and then check institutions where there is supervision in that particular area or field, and approach them. Send your CV and take it from there. I'm available offline if anyone needs assistance with that. Okay, so in summary, before I open up for questions, obviously we have just a few more minutes left. It's important to decide what you want at the end of the day. Are you looking for volume right now? Do you just want to tick the boxes? Because, okay, maybe corporate didn't work for you. You came to academia. You realized it's also rough in academia. Now you're just playing some survival tactics, staying afloat. And you'll do whatever to meet the minimum, to satisfy the minimum requirements at all cost, by hook or crook. But at the end of the day, what happens if these things catch up to you? Will you be able to face the consequences? Also, surround yourself with like-minded people, whether it's mentors, whether it's colleagues. Align yourself with people who embody and reflect where you would like to go or where you see yourself. You have no business associating or aligning yourself with people, let's say, that are academically dishonest or are not that serious about growing themselves as researchers in the long term. And then, of course, make the most of every opportunity. No matter where you are right now in your career, you will still have to make room for yourself elsewhere. If you rely on what you only have now and rely on my mentor will open doors for me, this, and that, you will miss out on so many other opportunities, which if you had gone out and pursued, you would have gone far. So that is very important. And personally, actually, I went from being a postdoctoral fellow to being a senior lecturer. Like, I jumped, that kind of career profile just by even being willing to do things that other people would thought were beneath them. But I knew that I need to build my profile. I need to build, my I need to cement my position and my place in this academic space. So even as a postdoctoral fellow, I wasn't given opportunity to teach. I would approach lecturers and say, "You have 2 slots in a week. Can I take one of yours?" And because they trusted me so much, they'll just take me through the preparations and all of that, and then I'll take 1 slot in a week. It's something I was able to put on my CV as teaching experience. And of course, with a good reference from those lecturers, then I had it, even though I wasn't paid for it, I had it on my CV as teaching experience. And then that landed me a senior lecturer job after only a year and a half of being a postdoctoral fellow. So make the most of every opportunity. Go out and grab whatever you can, knowing where you want to get, where you see yourself. And the last thing, overnight success is improbable unless you win the lottery or, by some kind of fluke. But with most things in life, anything worth it, you must sweat for. You must put in the effort. You will have to actually pull your weight. You're not going to get away with just waking up tomorrow and being one of the top cited researchers or most impactful researchers in your field. So make the most of every opportunity and know that you will grow with time. Thank you very much. That's it from my side. I'll open for any possible questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Patrick, for the positive feedback. Any questions, comments? Thank you. Yes, Doc?
Prof, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. Tell me, Prof, I know you haven't been at UJ for too long, but what is your feel around the individual brilliance that you see at UJ? Because I find that people work in silos. I think it's because of, I'm not sure where it's coming from, probably competition among colleagues, because I believe you can learn a lot from your colleagues, because we spoke about collaborations, and I believe that as an emerging researcher, you need to find a community, you need to find people that you can work around, in your environment. But I seem to find that at UJ, there's a lot of individual brilliance, people who are untouchable. They don't want to be working. Like you did mention something about growing your own wood, growing your own timber. It happens a lot. People, if they don't know you that well, you got to UJ as this reputable person, and now it's not going to be very easy for them to work with you because they don't know you. They'll rather groom their students and then they work with them. What is your feel around that? Thanks, Bob.
That's a tough one because it's usually challenging. Well, a lot of people find it challenging to penetrate, an environment that, especially where ways and other aspects are already set in place. However, just keep knocking on the doors. That's one thing I believe in life, that if you keep knocking on the doors, at least one eventually will open to you. And sometimes also, because again, as I mentioned before, we have, let's say, we have this notion in our vocation that people are intellectuals, people are high and mighty, dignified people. So sometimes the perception itself even prevents us as emerging researchers from approaching other, more seasoned academics, because sometimes you feel, hey, but really, this person, can I really approach them? They have 3,000 citations on their Google Scholar profile. Will they really take kindly to me coming to ask, can we collaborate? Maybe you've tried, you've knocked on other doors, but they haven't been opened to you, so you become discouraged. But it's important to just try your best. If the doors are not opening internally, then you create again your opportunities externally. And eventually, people will now come knocking on your doors. And I can speak from experience that in other cases, I've, knocked on some doors, they haven't opened. But tomorrow, then you're elevated to a new position, and those people have to come knocking on your door. And of course, it takes a very good character to then still, embrace these people and say, okay, let's work together, or I'll work with someone else that you have asked me to work with, and so forth. So never ever give up. Create the spaces for yourself if none are created for you. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, yes, we are in a collegial environment as academics, but it is ultimately one man for himself. Yes, the team aspect is so important, but also what do you bring to the team that will make that will make you, let's say, indispensable to others? It's very important to build that and think highly of yourself, even if you don't feel so. So that's what I can say for now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions, comments, anything else?
Yes, Prof. I see from the chat a question from Refilwe asking about the recording. Yes, this
Oh, the
session
recording.
is recorded and it will be available on Blackboard 24 hours after the session. It will be available for download as well. So we'll upload the slides and the session as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you all so much. Thank you for the positive feedback. Thank you for your attendance, for your participation. And I wish you all the best. I really do. I wish you all the best in your endeavors. My email address is there. I actually forgot to change the slide. My email is there if you need any advice or just, to bounce ideas off of each other. I think peer guidance is very helpful as well, even though mentorship is very important. But I think sometimes it's easier to relate with your peers, those who are also relatively at, the start of their uh, careers. So,
Uh, yes, thank you
okay.
so much, Prof, with such a rich and informative session. I hope the audience benefited from this session. Like it was very, very informative. As part of RCT, we would like to thank you so much, Prof, for such a session. And to all the participants, thank you so much for making this session possible for us. Thank you, guys. If you don't have any question, I think Prof talk about the art of networking and collaboration in slide 8. And fortunately enough, we do have another session on Friday, which talk about how to find research collaborators. So be look out for that session as well. So thank you so much, Prof, once again, and to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much, Prof. Appreciate you.